So, just a couple of housekeeping measures. If you haven't signed up for the networking dinners, please go to the ASP table and sign up for one of those yummy meals tonight for camaraderie and information sharing. Also, there's some competitive people out there using that app. So, I was talking to a couple of people, they're getting very aggressive. So, if you haven't been, you know, tweeting and giving reviews and taking photos, someone's going to win the prizes and it may not be you. So just be forewarned. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Patrick, whose legacy comes from seafaring Dutch sailormen on the China tea trade. And his father ended up staying in England, and that's where Patrick, well, your great grandfather, okay. Don't exaggerate. Well, yeah, you're a lot younger in person. Um, so, as you may have read in his bio, he's the author of 7 books, lots of articles, and he's a visiting lecturer at Cranfield School of Management, which, if you've never been there, it's a beautiful school and it's got a great reputation in England and in the rest of Europe. I'm also very pleased to see how Patrick and his colleagues have put together pretty amazing technology out there. And one of the things Patrick and I share is a love for complexity. And as some as you may know, the field of emergence. And uh, Mintzberg has written about the emergent strategy, one that comes up from collective consciousness, collective complexity. And I think Patrick's going to share with us some of those ideas. And he did confirm that Mintzberg kind of influenced things, but this is stuff that's been happening. I think they're operationalizing what I think is some really, really cool things. So please give us a warm welcome for Patrick.
Okay, I think is the good. Okay, so afternoon, and hope you recovered from lunch, which is almost gone on the front table here, but not quite. Still working away at it. So what I wanted to talk about was, or what Dan asked me to come and talk about was patterns of strategy, which is um, an approach to doing strategy which is radically different from conventional approaches. So a little bit about that as an approach, well, quite a lot about that as an approach. A little bit to start with about why we developed it, and something about the ways in which it's different. Partly that's because it comes from a systems theory background, so everything's a bit different coming from that. So this is us. We're a consultancy, Fractal. We do stuff around organisation design quite a lot, and change and strategy for, I suppose, about the last 7 or 8 years, something like that. So we've got a much longer history in doing organisation design. Part of the reason that we developed this approach was because clients were asking us to do strategy work, and we couldn't find stuff that we thought was sort of credible and worked for them. We don't sell at all. All our work comes from referrals, which is why the client base is as diverse as it is. And the catch with that, of course, is if you don't deliver, you don't get referrals, you don't get any more work, and you don't get asked back. So it's kind of important for us to do stuff that actually works, and that, having confidence in an approach that would actually do the strategy was really, really quite important for us. So a little bit about, I want to go back to sort of some of the fundamentals, really. And Jim mentioned Mintzberg. So Mintzberg definitely was an influence on this. So going back to Mintzberg's article on deliberate and emergent strategy, you can kind of split the field into those two kind of domains, really, or two ways of thinking about strategy. So the deliberate is essentially saying that strategy is about our intention, and that's fine. That's okay. Emergent strategy, the conception really is that emergent strategy is what actually happens. So never mind what we intended, what is the strategic direction we ended up going in, and how did that come about? So in deliberate strategy, there are outside-in views. So, you analyze the market and decide where would be a nice place for us to play, and then work out, how you're going to do that. And then you've got another set of approaches which are kind of inside out. We do the sort of, resource-based view of the firm or whatever. We assess how good we are at what we do, and then work out where would be a nice place to play. So there's two kind of views there, really. Both of them are well tooled up, so there's plenty of kit in both of those areas. A lot of them are like this, the 2x2 matrices, and basically strategy is an exercise in playing pin the tail on the donkey, and the donkey's backside is always the top right-hand quadrant for some reason. So that makes it easier, makes the strategist's job much, much easier, of course. In the emergent strategy space, there is no tooling. So what Henry Mintzberg said was, mostly what happens is what happens, and it is not what we intended. What he didn't say was, how does it emerge, and why does it emerge, and what comes from that? And up to now, there hasn't been any tooling around that, really. So just back on the conventional side, whether you start with a market-led or an inside-out view, there's kind of a dominant narrative. Oh, yeah, I forgot about this bit. It does have the slight handicap that most of the time it doesn't work. So the most optimistic survey results I have seen come in at 70% failure rate. The most pessimistic was from the late great Russ Akov at 98% of strategic plans not implemented. Now this is pretty serious. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether it's 70%, 80%, 90%, whatever. If more than half the time what we're trying to do isn't working, that's a bit of a handicap, really. Whichever way you look at it, whether it's inside out or outside in, there's a kind of dominant narrative in conventional strategy, which is the journey metaphor, which is basically saying that strategy is about where we are, where we want to be, and drawing a straight line from where we are to where we want to be, and that's the plan, and that's super. Now, as a way of planning, a trip to the seaside, that's fantastic. But that has the advantage that the seaside is an actual physical place that exists, whereas our strategic future is not an actual place that exists. It's something that has to be created in the future. So as a kind of metaphor, the journey thing slightly falls down, And coming at it from a systems point of view, always what we look at in systems is relationships. And one of the sort of things that's blindingly obvious about the conventional view of strategy is that it tends to ignore what everybody else is doing. So most strategic models, they kind of abstract up what everyone else is doing to a sort of high level of sort of general trends, so everybody's going into big data or whatever it might be, or advanced, artificial intelligence or whatever. It doesn't do the specific, we're doing this, they're doing that. But of course, all our strategic environments are built like that. They're full of other organizations doing other stuff. And under the pressure of that, where we're trying to get to tends to shift. And we tend to run into situations where we're about to crash into somebody else. And we end up doing plan B instead of plan A. So, looked at systemically, it is not in the least surprising, if you just do the numbers and say we've got 10 actors playing in the same strategic space, why would our plan be the one that works out perfectly and nobody touches it? So if you think about trying to drive down, I'm in the States, you don't have motorways, do you? You have freeways? Yeah? Try and drive down one of those. The way we're taught to do strategy conventionally, which is you just ignore what everybody else is doing and say, right, I'm heading down there, and off you go. You wouldn't get very far, and it's kind of no surprise, really, it doesn't work that often in business strategy either, as far as I'm concerned. But there's another thing to this. So one of the things that we were interested in was this, that if, for the most part, strategic plans don't get implemented, and the 90% figure comes from Kaplan and Norton, the balanced scorecard guys, who are about as conventional as you can get. So this is not some freaky statistic from some weirdo you've never heard of. I wasn't really classifying myself as a weirdo you've never heard of there, but never mind. Anyway, and yet, despite this, the world is changing, and it demonstrably is. The question that it raised for us is, what the hell is going on? Because if it isn't the strategies that are driving the changes, and it can't be because they're not being actioned, what is going on? Yeah, and that was a kind of non-obvious question for us. And to answer it, we went, as we so often do in systems, to look for lessons from biology. And where we went for this was to the work of a Chilean biologist, Humberto Maturana, and his model of structural coupling, which is the model of how organisms evolve, how species evolve. So when Charles Darwin went off to the Galapagos and observed that you could see finches evolving, well, you couldn't observe them evolve, you could see that they had evolved. He didn't have a theory of how that had happened. He just observed that it had happened. And he posited that, Darwin posited that it might be competition, and he got that idea from a mate of his who was an economist, Herbert Spencer. Maturana, still around today, he's an old guy, but if you ever get the chance, he's well worth a listen. He's much better listened to than read, I have to say. He's not one of the world's greatest writers, but a brilliant thinker, lovely, lovely man. So his observation around this is that what drives the evolution of species is what he calls structural coupling. It's a really simple idea, which is that organisms are coupled to their environments in such a way that the organism drives changes in the environment, and the environment drives changes in the organism. And through time, they co-evolve. So the hummingbird's beak evolves to fit the flower, and the flower evolves to fit the hummingbird's beak. So through lots and lots of micro-adaptations, the thing advances. And if you transpose that model to organizations, once you get your eye in, you can see this happening all the time. So all the time, organizations are adapting to immediate demands from their environment. And that pressure tends to override our strategic intent because it's short-term and it's immediate and we act on it, yeah? So what we wanted was a way of kind of understanding that. And as with the birds and the beaks, there is no one right answer. Yeah, so you take a Porterian view of strategy and there's like two answers. You can sort of go high end or you can pile it high and sell it cheap. We've got around 100 different patterns of strategy that we see repeatedly in use using the approach I'm going to talk to you about. So there are lots and lots and lots of ways of winning strategically that are proven. So a structural coupling relationship, a coupling between an organization and its environment, it has a natural trajectory, yeah? So, and it's driven by the dynamics of the relationship. So you are in a relationship, and what you're presented with in that is some opportunities and threats, and you take a step forward to address those. And it presents you with more opportunities and more risks, and you take another step forward and another step forward and another step forward. And each of those individual steps kind of makes perfect sense. But overall, they evolve into a trajectory for the relationship as a whole, and for you, your strategic direction as a whole. And you may be conscious of each step, and each step may make sense on its own, but we tend not to be conscious of the whole thing. You know, we tend not to see where we went. And if we look backwards, occasionally we can see there were forks in the road, and 3 years ago we could have gone down this route instead of down that route, but we didn't actually spot at the time. We did the obvious thing. And there's a thing in Richard Rummelt, which is proximate action, and kind of proximate action is the next step on the road. You know? So if you think about structural coupling and fit for organizations in this kind of way, there's some key questions. So what relationships are we in? What are they like? Where are they going to take us? And what's that going to turn us into? And is that who we want to be? Yeah? Because these are the fundamental things that are going to drive who we end up being as organizations. And of course, looking at it strategically, organizations have several structural couplings. So typically with the market, with competitors, with partners possibly, with a regulator. And our choices are to change which relationships we have or to change the nature of the relationship. And mostly what I'm going to talk about is changing the nature of the coupling. Yeah. But each of those exerts a natural pressure or tension on us. They're pulling, each one is pulling us in, trying to pull us in particular directions that make sense for it. And our overall direction is a product of those couplings. So overall, we get, if one's pulling us that way and one's pulling us that way, we tend to end up heading for the door there. Yeah. And this is what Mintzberg called emergent strategy. It may have nothing to do with intent by any party. It is just the product of the pressures that are on us, moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month. Yeah. So for us, our definition of strategy is this. It's about changing the nature of our fit with our environment to our advantage so that, we're doing okay out of it by concentrating power in time. So there's three kind of dimensions, critical dimensions to that: fit, time, and power. And we break those down into elements so we can get a better handle on them. So there's a couple of power, concentration and strength, 3 of fit, drive, differentiation, stretch, and 1 of time. And I'm just going to run you through those and then look at how they build up into strategies. So first of these is differentiation, so the degree of similarity or difference to others. And there are 3 sort of levels we can have that. So you can be part of a herd, at the edge, or an individual. So most sectors, there's a recognizable herd of organizations. So they are very similar in type. They tend to self-reference. So, if you think about the automotive herd, if one brings out a bloated super mini, they all bring out bloated super minis, And where there's a herd, there's an edge to that herd, and there will be players on the leading edge, and you know who they are because they're the ones that everybody's copying. And there will be players on the back edge, and you know who they are because nobody's copying them. And occasionally there'll be some on the edge. So if you think again, automotive, Subaru they do lots of things that are different, but nobody's actually copying Subaru. But they're similar, kind of similar enough. They build their cars in the same sort of patterns as other people. But they have different technology. They've got a different engine. They used to do the engineering in a different way. And, they're kind of different, but not different enough. Saab was another one. Yeah. And then, of course, you've got other players who sit completely outside of the herd. So if you think about the IT herd, that's been dominated for a very long time by Microsoft, and before that it was dominated by IBM and then around IBM, the 7 dwarfs. Outside of that, all the time has been Apple, and Apple did everything they possibly could to be different from everybody else. So they had a completely different business model. They're the only people who took both hardware and software, the combination. They're the only people who took design seriously. So at the time when everybody else was making weird beige boxes, they did nutty, see-through, fancy colours, And they did everything they could to be individual. And that was great for them, right up until they invented the iPad. And as soon as they invented the iPad, the entire herd has stampeded over to where Apple are, and they are now no longer individual, they're part of the herd. They are really, really struggling to understand how to be a part of the herd. And they're too rich to have the guts to go, right, we're going to be individual again. And without Steve Jobs, how would you, they're not going to go under anytime soon because they're rich as Croesus, but, it creates a bit of an identity crisis. So that's the first one, differentiation. The second one is around drive. So if we've got a structural coupling relationship, have we got a relationship in which one party is basically shaping and the other one is reacting? So, one's left unchanged essentially by the relationship, and the other one's doing all the change. Or have we got a relationship in which the two parties basically co-evolve, each shapes the other to a kind of similar degree? And there are no rights or wrongs about this. It kind of just is how it is, And the third one is around stretch. So this is kind of more conventional in a way. So there's a gradient of how much stretch a relationship puts in the organization from incremental up to paradigm. So, and that's on a kind of risk and reward trade-off, if you like. So incremental, low risk, low reward. Paradigm, very high risk, very high reward. Confound is kind of the wild card in that. So confound is a stretch that actually throws us out of joint. So it actually sort of disconnects who we are, and it is a sort of particular sort of strategic move. Time, again, we've got 2 parties in this relationship, or possibly more. Is it a relationship where one party is significantly faster than the other? And if one's faster, by definition, the other one's slower? Or is it a relationship in which both parties are traveling at about the same speed? And again, there's no rights or wrongs about this. It kind of is what it is. Yeah. If we want to change the time differential, I think time's really interesting because in conventional strategy, it hardly ever figures at all, except as a timeline in planning. But if you think about military strategy, it is to quote the Duke of Wellington, time is everything, you know. So there's a kind of fundamental difference in philosophy there. I personally think it's really important. If you want to change the time differential, there's three ways you can do that. You can use foresight. So foresight, if you can see something coming far enough ahead, that effectively stretches time for you. It's a way of slowing time down, so you don't have to react as fast if you've got longer to do it, you know. You can alter the change rate, so either do higher orders of change or just crank the handle on it faster, or you can alter the cycle time, either on operational systems or on strategic systems. So if you think about the Toyota revolution, that was primarily based on a massive shift in operational cycle time. So going from months to refresh a production line to single minute exchange of dies, and you could do it in maybe an hour, you know, which revolutionized the economics of the industry. One of the things that we're really interested in is decision action cycle time, following Boyd. You know Boyd? You ought to, he's an American. Yeah. So it's one of the really, really high leverage places to play. If you can speed up how fast you can take decisions, that has a massive impact. And because it involves relatively few numbers of people, it's relatively easy to do. So those are the ways in which you can alter the time differential. And then we've got strength. So there's absolute strength. Is this a relationship in which we've got one party who's significantly stronger and by definition the other one's weaker? Or is it a relationship where the power is essentially balanced? And whatever power we have choices about how to concentrate that. So do we basically do one thing? Do we do multiple things? Or do we do loads and loads and loads of things? Yeah. And again, there's no rights or wrongs. There are just choices about that. If we want to change the power differential, there's, again, like with the foresight and stuff, there's two things we can do. We can deploy critical mass. So can we pull together enough resource to shift the balance of power? Or we can use agility. So for us, agility has a really specific, I know people witter on about agility now because of agile software and stuff. Apologies if there are any agilists in the room. For us, it's got a really specific meaning. It's the ability to redeploy resource really quickly. Yeah, so it can do, effectively, it amplifies the resource availability because you can switch it from doing one thing to another thing really fast. Yeah. So we're looking at relationships and we're looking at the differentials between the two parties in those relationships. And it's the differentials between them that drive the dynamics. So where you've got a relationship where basically there's very little difference between the two parties, then not a lot happens. It tends to be incredibly stable. So if you think about something like Procter & Gamble and Unilever, they've been slugging it out for decades and nobody actually gets the upper hand, yeah, because they're pretty evenly matched on everything. You would have to do something really, really significantly different to get an edge there. So it's not comfortable, you know. It's a head-to-head grinding war of attrition, but it's dead stable. So the energy in the relationship comes from that degree of differential. And one of the things we're looking at is kind of the pockets of high and low pressure here, like an energy system, because that's what drives the winds, the dynamics of the system as a whole. In competition, any differential can be used to your advantage. So being faster obviously can be an advantage if you know what to do with it. Being slower can also be an advantage if you know what to do with it. It's less obvious. Similarly, being weaker, being stronger is obviously an advantage. Being weaker can be if you know how to play it. Yeah. In collaboration, so I was talking to somebody here yesterday who was doing collaborative stuff in strategy. In collaboration, it's kind of different because there's a kind of sweet spot. you want to collaborate with other organizations who are different to you, otherwise there's no point in collaborating. But if they're too different to you, it's really, really painful, you know? So there's a kind of a Goldilocks thing in the middle of just different enough to make it worthwhile. Yeah? So I want to take you through how these different elements string together in a strategy. And I'm going to pick a historic one. So this is the Honda-Yamaha war of 1981 to 1983. Okay. So both these organizations are parts of big Japanese keiretsus. They're big conglomerates. So the motorcycle divisions did not stand alone. You know, they are kind of warriors in the cause of the keiretsu. And at the time, these two organizations were pretty nearly balanced in terms of overall strength, the resource they could deploy. Absolutely perfectly matched in terms of concentration of that. So each had roughly 60 bikes in the market, and they were matched segment for segment, niche for niche, model for model. So if one brought out a 754 cylinder water-cooled, the other one did. They were absolutely matched bike for bike right across the range. They were co-evolving, so neither was particularly asymmetrically driving change in the other. One would do something, the other one would respond, the second one would do something, the first one would respond. You know, it sort of mooched along quite happily like that. All the change was incremental, so the big structural changes had happened a kind of generation before, and they were just, you know, iterating on a conventional model that they had. And it was perfectly synchronized. So once a year at the annual bike shows, everybody would retire something like 10 models and bring in another 10. And everybody knew that was the game, and it happened like clockwork. Dead easy. Honda was seen as being at the leading edge of the herd, not for anything they were doing now, but for historic reasons. They were there because they got there first. And Yamaha was seen as being part of the herd along with Suzuki and Kawasaki. Yeah. And you can see that Honda's advantage in this is absolutely wafer thin because there are no differentials. There is nothing keeping them at that leading edge. It's purely we got here first and everybody is now caught up with us just about. Now at the time, Honda were investing massively in their cars division, so the Honda war chest was taken up with that. And Yamaha saw that as an opportunity. So the Yamaha Keiretsu got onto the Yamaha motorbike board and said, this is your opportunity. You will take control of the motorbike market. And the Yamaha plan looked like this. They built the world's biggest motorbike factory, so that gave them critical mass, which they calculated would move them into stronger and push Honda back into being weaker, which they calculated would allow them to shape the relationship and push Honda back into reacting, which would move them to the leading edge and stuff Honda back into the herd. Win for Yamaha. Yeah. Didn't quite happen like that. The Honda Keiretsu board went along to Honda Motorbikes and said, you can't have any more money because we're using the war chest for building cars, or building car factories actually. So technically you are now weaker than Honda and you cannot match them power for power. You're going to have to do something smarter. So the Honda strategy looked kind of like this. It starts with foresight. You cannot build the world's biggest motorcycle factory in Japan without anybody noticing it. So they knew what was happening. They knew what the strategy was. They knew what the timetable was because you can see the sticks going up. So you knew how long it's going to take. And they waited. They waited until Yamaha were fully committed to building and bringing on stream this new factory. In the meantime, they massively reduced the cycle time it would take them to design, develop, and bring to market new bikes. And they massively increased the agility. So they restructured into lots and lots and lots of multidisciplinary product development teams. And the combination of those two meant that their ability to change went up through the roof. So that makes them faster and Yamaha slower. But Yamaha didn't know this yet because this potential hadn't yet been unleashed. When it was unleashed, they went from multiple to diffuse. So they went from 60 bikes in the market and brought out 113 models in an 18-month period. Okay? This is not like building software. Okay? It's not like you write the code and you just press a button and it all happens. Every single bike has to be made. It has to be designed. The prototype has to be made. It has to be road tested. It has to be legalized. And then you've got to build them in the factory. And then you've got to get them in the showrooms. Yeah. So this is, in an 18-month period, this is no mean feat. Okay. They did it by changing the paradigm. So they didn't have time to do any whizzy engineering. What they did was change the paradigm of the industry by moving to styling. So previously, if you're a biker, you basically started off by deciding what size of bike you wanted, and then you looked at the models that were available, and then you bought it, yeah, because there wasn't much between them. Honda went to building bikes that were styled for particular tribes of bikers. So now if you're a biker, you went, there's a bike built for somebody just like me, and it's built by Honda, and you know what? Yamaha haven't got one. What you going to do? Yeah? People bought the Honda bikes. They did that, of course, deliberately to stuff up Yamaha, to confound them. So we know the strategy is working when they start to shape and Yamaha start to react to it. So at the same time as Yamaha trying to bring this factory on stream, which is designed to build a few models in large numbers, suddenly they have to switch to doing that, because you can't stop, and developing new models. So they brought out 37 new models in the 18-month period, but of course it doesn't rack up against the 113. Now the number of 113 is not an accident. Basically what they did was take every single bike, significant bike that Yamaha had in the market, and split the market in half for that bike. So they built two models for the two types of people that might build that bike. So they literally fragmented the market structure so that there would not be a market for Yamaha's bikes. The number is not an accident. If they'd only done, I don't know, 70, it wouldn't have worked. Yeah, it has to be that, it has to be at that kind of scale. And at the end of the period, Yamaha are left with 12 months stock of unsold and unsaleable bikes, and formally surrendered in a very kind of Japanese way. And they ended up dumping the stock that they couldn't sell, and they said, sorry, we'll never do it again. And they ended up dumping the stock on the third world. Yeah. So, and I think what's interesting about this is, well, lots of things are interesting about it. Partly it's the speed of it. Yeah. So the whole thing end to end was 18 months. And if you think about the planning phase for this, it's got to be really, really quick. To go from how on earth are we going to deal with this threat to we're going to do it like this, and that means this is changing the organization, and we do it now because we've got to get these things out within 9 months in order to thrash them in an acceptable time. Yeah. And I think the other thing is just the guts involved, because you've got no guarantee as Honda that this is going to work, and your job at least is on the line with it. So that's an example of a pattern of strategy. And you can see as well how the whole thing is built on the dynamics of the relationship. So you've got a really, really stable thing. One thing changes, which is the war chest propping up Honda motorbikes is taken away, and the whole dynamic changes, and suddenly you're into a really, really fast-moving situation from something that's been stable for years. So I want to take you through another one. This is the authority strategy. So this is one that this is the strategy that Gartner used. You know Gartner, yeah, and Forrester. So they started off as a sort of fairly normal IT consultancy company. The strategy starts with investing in critical mass, so real deep expertise in the area of what the future of IT might look like, which makes them relatively stronger to the rest of the market. Then using that foresight, so building that into formal foresight of where we think the thing is going. And the radical shift for them was then to move into using that. It's radical for them, but it's disruptive for the rest of the industry. Yeah. So now if you're an IT player, you're actually being shaped by Gartner and having to react. So if you're an IT vendor, you put in your product what Gartner tell you to put in your product, or you ain't in the magic quadrant and the buyers don't buy you, you know. So they are massively shaping. And the trick of this really is this connection between shape and stronger. The more Gartner and Forrester are able to shape, the stronger they become. The stronger they become, the more they're able to shape. It's a really, really difficult position to move somebody away from, yeah, to use a... Once you're there, it's really, really strong and easily defended. So we've got, when we started this, what we wanted was a kind of language of how to understand emergent strategy, how we end up going in the directions we end up going in. And what we ended up with, purely by chance really, was the observation that there are repeating patterns. So when we wrote the book, copy outside, we'd found about 80 successful recurring patterns that we saw repeated. We've worked really hard to find some more, and we found another 20. But out of millions of theoretical possible combinations, it ain't that many. And we'd assumed that most of them would be in competitive or growth, because that's what everybody witters on about in strategy. Actually, the biggest category by far is defensive. Well, not by far. The biggest category is defensive. So most of the strategies that we actually see are let's not try to lose. And the second biggest category is cunning plans, so strategies of guile and deception. Mostly, it must be said, in the financial industry. But there are strategies for sort of lots and lots and lots of different situations. Some advantages, from our point of view, it's massively faster. We did an exercise for a financial company. They've been working with one of the big strategy houses for 18 months on their strategy. They reckon they got further and faster in 3 hours with this than they had in the last 18 months. Dead precise. So you can plan in real detail really quickly. So if you think about the Honda example, you know exactly how many models you need to produce. You know exactly how many teams you need to do that. You know how fast they need to work. You know it's not going to work if they're not actually pulling those things out quickly enough. Yeah, works well for competition and for collaboration. Scalable, so we've done from sort of multinationals down to team level, and since business ecosystems are the flavour of the conference, we use it for that as well. And it connects directly to stuff that we're interested in, so organisation design and strategic risk and transformation planning. Just throw in a couple of models. So we use it for modelling business ecosystems. We don't get asked to do this as much as I like, and certainly not as much as we get asked to do the strategy stuff, but we model business ecosystems as networks of different players and the strategies that they're kind of trying to execute and how those are playing out through time. So the one on the left's a farmer one, and the one on the right's an energy one. Yeah, we did an exercise just before Christmas with in a sector in the UK, and the guy, it was department stores who are not having a good time. The guy who commissioned us to do it took one look at the model and went and packed his job in and went and found another one the same week. Yeah, they're really, really good predictive tools, I think. So that's me. I think we've got time for questions, have we? Okay.
That's the questions. Is it so fast because you're just selecting among the strategy
No.
options?
No.
Why is it? Talk about why it's faster.
It's interesting because the way we do it, we don't say, oh, here's 80, pick one. You know, we sit down and we get them to model the relationships that they're in and come up with a strategy. When we started, I'm groping for an answer because I don't actually know, and I don't really know the answer. When we started, we expected it to be really hard for people to get this because it's so different conceptually, and it was really, really easy. So, I mean, we've done it with about 70 or 80 clients, so that's, you know, a few hundred people, and I think we've had, leaving aside academics, we had a group of academics who really couldn't get their heads around it. But leaving that aside, I think we've had 4 people who kind of didn't get it. Most people just go, right, get that. Well, it's like this. So that it's pretty quick to get to where we are, and then it's, right, what could we change from there to get it to somewhere that we like? You know, and a typical first pass exercise might take an hour and a half. And once you've been through that a few times, you can kind of do them in about 20 minutes. You know, to get to the planning, right, so actually it would mean these people moving this and that. That takes longer, but to get to the basic strategy, right, we're going to do this, and that's how it's going to fit in with that, and that's really, really quick. I mean, I think there's something about just getting to the essence of stuff. I don't know.
Hey,
You're not down in the weeds straight away.
Hey, Patrick, do you
Yep.
prep them before you get into the strategy
where am I?
session? Me, I'm over here.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Do you prep them to make so they don't go in saying, I have no idea what you're talking about? Do you give it a little education?
No, yeah, we do. I mean, we take them through what we've just been through, basically.
I think so, yeah.
But I mean, that's relatively quick, isn't it?
You're working with smart people then.
We like to. That's why I'm here, Jim. That's why I'm here.
I'll come to your camera. I'm sorry.
We keep missing you, don't we?
So
Keep missing Dan here. So.
actually, who we missing? Let's get to the person.
No, it's all right. Go.
Okay.
Go.
Hi. Quick question. So, from your understanding, foresight, how is that meant, and how is that applied?
It's tragically mostly. So doing strategic foresight well is cheap and easy, and mostly organisations don't. Okay, so if you think about the stats on the death rate of organisations, so the S&P 500. Okay, so you have the honour of living in the most successful economy in the world, and the S&P 500 are the most successful companies in the most successful economy in the world. 85% gone out of business in 40 years. Okay, so there's only, well, now I think there's 13% still alive. I think only one of them's of the original S&P 500 still in the S&P, and a few of those are because of sort of internal corruption and collapse, the Roman Empire stuff we were talking about just before lunch. Mostly it's because the world changed and they didn't spot it. And you just got to be, you can't afford to go to sleep on watch. It's as simple as that, and it's not hard to do. It really, 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 really isn't hard to do, but mostly people don't do it. Okay, it's one of the easiest, cheapest, highest leverage things you can do. Yeah. It's not even that difficult, really. I mean, you can get sort of stressed out about the technicalities of it, but it's even so, it's not that hard. There's a bit of technique to it, but just waking up, opening your eyes, and paying some damned attention helps.
Thank you, Patrick. This is so these animations are quite compelling, and
You're distracted now, aren't you?
No, they've prompted a question that I saw from your Yamaha and Honda example. It seems that Yamaha intended to move from Coevolve to being the shaper and having Honda react, and obviously Honda's reaction was one that they didn't anticipate and completely flipped who would be in charge. With each of these models, is that the almost Achilles heel for anyone who presumes to make these somewhat intentional yet complex moves where the reaction of whoever else is in their market could totally turn this on its head? And therefore, is there actually a whole set of if-thens where if you start to pursue this, you already can predict where you would go were your competitor to start to do something different?
One of the interesting things about these is you kind of look at it and go, that's a plan. And it can be a plan, but all of these can happen purely accidentally. They can happen just because of the differentials between the organizations. You know, you can destroy companies without even intending to. You know, you can destroy other people, other players in your marketplace without even intending to. You know, so I mean, it goes back to that slide I put up early on, which is you know the car crash slide. You know, if you're not looking at what everybody else is doing, what do you expect to happen? You know, so yeah, I mean, Yamaha thought, right, we come up with a plan, we'll do this. That's them dead. You know, well, not dead, but you know, that's them kicked to the curb. Well, it doesn't necessarily work like that. If you're switched on and watching what's coming, you know. So yeah, and I mean, one of the things I think that, again, that's really easy and really, really cheap is preparation. It's so much easier to prepare this stuff in advance. Do you know the Microsoft Netscape story? Anybody? So I think it was a Wednesday. Do you remember Netscape? Yes. Yeah, they're not here anymore, are they? So I think it was a Wednesday, and Netscape posted the results, and they'd sold X number of licenses, and they'd got so much, you know, that the capital valuation was so much, you know. And on the Thursday, notice went out to 400 people in Microsoft saying, you're not in any trouble, just report to building 36 or whatever it was, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So they rock up, building 36, and there's a briefing team there saying, right, as of Monday morning, your job is to take out Netscape. Here's the plan. Here's your work groups. Take the weekend off. Come in. Boom. Here's your workstations. Go get them. Now, that plan had been sitting in somebody's drawer for a couple of years. You know, may never have been used because it was a plan for what would happen if web browsers ever became a thing, and could they take us out? You know, and they calculated how long it would take them to build a product that would destroy somebody like Netscape if somebody like Netscape ever came along, you know. And I mean, the planning's cheap, you know. Planning's really, really cheap. Oh, and they said, don't worry about your jobs; they've already been backfilled. You know, so the planning went to that level, Dave. It's kind of not hard to do if you know you got to do it, you know.
We got a couple more questions. One back here.
So how can we adapt this modality to a public sector situation where we don't have control over all of these various things? Like Congress, for example, might have control over our budget or over our planning process time frame, but our competitors might have a completely different set of control. They might have control of everything. So we're not necessarily as nimble.
Life's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. So how do we adapt this over? Is that possible? And it's fair if it's not. I just am wondering that.
No, I mean, everybody's got constraints, you know. I mean, we do loads of public sector stuff with this, you know, and they just have different. And the world is as the world is, you know. There's no excuse for going, oh, I can't do anything. You know, you can always do something. You know, and you've got in the public sector, you've got strengths that the private sector could only dream of. You know, I mean, it's quite hard to go bankrupt. You know. Yeah. I mean, I know it can be done, but it's harder.
Well, I'm sure Patrick will stay around and take some more of your questions after this. But Patrick, on behalf of ASP, I would like to thank you and honor your keynote for us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good.